All right, boys and girls, welcome to the Bass Kayak and Beers podcast. This is the real life. Your boy Armando. We're gonna have a great episode for you today. One of, uh, in my opinion, one of the best podcasts you're gonna listen to when it comes to. I mean, I'm gonna say it just overall, not just about bass fishing, but a podcast whether you're a fisherman or not that you probably enjoy listening to is Bobby Roastbeak from the Jigs and Bigs. And I am super excited to have him on the podcast. As far as I usually do my weekly summary, but like if you heard the previous podcast, I am away on vacation, so this is a pre-recorded episode. It's not a live show. And so I'm recording back-to-back episodes on the same day. And I'm still a little bit under the weather, so I apologize if you hear me coughing, if you hear me snorting or sneezing. But we're gonna pull through and get this episode. But again, I am super excited about having Bobby Roast Beef in our show. If you haven't listened to Jigs and Bigs, you're totally missing out. It is a fun episode, which uh, I'm sure you can relate to if even if you're not a bass fisherman, because it's just entertaining. It's in his blood, and we're gonna talk about his personality, his job outside of podcasting, which kind of correlates with what he does. So you're gonna enjoy this episode. So, anyways, if you follow me on social media, uh, just remember Bass Kayak and Beers on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. If you're not following me, you can start following me there. You can listen to our podcast on our MP3 platforms on pretty much every podcast streaming platform. And if you can, we will love it if you give us your reviews. Also, if you listen on Spotify, we do have some questions and answers that you can leave your comments. Tell us what you love about the show. Tell us where we can do better and any future guests or future subjects you want us to tackle on this episode, or I'm sorry, on this podcast, whether it's Bass Kayak and Beers, the real life, or the Advanced Kayak Angler, which is hosted by Dan Perry. So, anyways, enough about me. Let's bring in our guest, Bobby Roast Beef, or I should say Rob Charette.
Yes,
name, right?
that is
Bobby,
my real name.
how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Awesome, man. Excited to have you on the podcast. I've been listening to you since that episode you did, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years ago, where there was a collaboration between you, Serious Angler Podcast, I think,
Yep.
Bailey Eichbert. I think Bailey Eichbert was the one who hosted that podcast. Andrew Hayes from Tackle Talk Podcast, and one of my favorite people in the world, Brian Shearer, the OG from Paddle and Fin.
Yep.
And since then, I've listened. I haven't listened to every episode, I'll admit to that, but I've really enjoyed listening to some of your episodes. Brings a lot of energy. But before we dive into your episode, I know that we can't talk about Jigs and Bigs without talking about Bobby Roast Beef and how this all got started, because I love the story of how you got to where you are, not just in the podcast, but in your professional life. So tell us a little bit about who Bobby Roast Beef is and how do we got here.
So, we were talking about earlier, and basically the timeline goes like this. I have always wanted to work in radio. I've always been fascinated with radio. It's part of how I got the interest to become a DJ. It all kind of works together. Like when I was a young kid in middle school, I can remember I had a stereo that had a dual cassette deck, and I used to make mixtapes all the time. And I used to take an old set of headphones and plug them into the mic jack and use that as a microphone. So in order to record my own voice, and when I would do a mixtape, it was a mixtape, but there was like an announcement in between, and I would queue up songs, and it was wild. And I would do this with a friend of mine. Eventually that would turn into a DJ business. This was 30 years ago. This month marks 30 years in the DJ industry. And I started with him just doing like school events, dances and proms and things. Eventually we started doing college events. And that was a blast. That was probably some of the most fun DJing I've had in my life. Some of those parties were absolutely great. Then we would do like the occasional like corporate Christmas party or something like that. And it was just sort of kind of small stuff. It got to a point where my buddy and I we were both in college at the time. He was changing schools. We had an apartment together in the small town I lived in. And he moved off to upstate New York, with his family was out that way now. And he moved out there to change schools. I actually moved back home with my folks, and we divided the business. I took the music library. He took all the hardware, all of the mixers and all the PA equipment and everything. And we just kind of dissolved the business there. Right about that time is when I took a job in television. My first job in television. And actually, I take that back. It was my only job in television. I worked there for almost like 18 years. It was crazy. So I got into TV as a production assistant, and this is because I had tried to get into radio and had the interest from such a young age. I went to a vocational school that offered a program in radio that eventually they dissolved when I had finally got to the age where that program was opened up to me. So I had worked in electronics. That was my shop of choice. And in there, I managed to get an opportunity to work in television at a local, like, public access channel. And it was just kind of like getting my feet wet as far as like how these cameras work, how the lighting works, how to do all of these little tasks that a production assistant basically would need to know. So I went into college into the telecommunications field. Um, Based off of that, knowing a little bit already. And then after a couple of years, I managed to land this job in TV. So at this point, I wanted to work in radio, but now was meeting people in broadcasting. And I started to realize that really in working in radio, there's very little money. And there is only slightly more money available if you work in television. It's not the glamorous job that some people think it is at all. You get to like major market or something and it's a different animal, but you got a lot of people there that live like at home, like, oh yeah, I rent a room from my uncle, or you know, or like they inherited a house or something like that. You get, and that just seems for the most part, or they married rich. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. It's very difficult to get by having a family. And at this, like I said, 18 years I worked there. At this point, I was married with 2 children. We had just bought a house. And, during that time, after my DJ business had kind of dissolved, I got into working to supplement my income. I got into working for another DJ company. And I learned a lot about working weddings in there. That's where sort of the MC skills really started to sort of come to be. When I owned my own previous company with my buddy Tony, all the time, anytime that we had to make an announcement for anything, you could almost see it in him, like his fear of getting on the mic,
Yeah.
and I had the same fear. Like, I did not like public speaking. I couldn't do this back then with the sort of unhinged freedom that I do now. It's literally just doing this over and over and over again until you get comfortable with it. And I would take the mic and I would make my announcements, and hey, it was great. And I had, while I was working in television, I actually had the opportunity to do some voiceover work for the station. And this works out really good because they don't pay you like a freelancer. They pay you like a $25 bonus to record a voice on a commercial that they're going to literally make thousands of dollars on. And that's
I
no fun.
love that.
Nobody wants that. So they'll make, when I say thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars on. So I would record a spot and, I kind of created like a lineup of tapes. In fact, actually, I forgot to talk about this. So the first real kind of break that I realized that I kind of had was I wrote a commercial in college for a company called Crank 2O. And what Crank 2O makes is not carbonated, caffeinated water, bottled water with caffeine. And I had the opportunity to record a commercial at 2 of the biggest radio stations for a kid my age at that time. Rock radio was just like, this was at like the peak. We had mentioned earlier Howard Stern. Do you remember Opie and Anthony from XM Radio?
Vaguely. I remember his name, but I don't remember listening to his shows.
I forget one of these guys. I think it was Anthony, had very controversial and left the show. Basically, he got canceled.
Oh yeah.
So then Opie kind of took over and did his thing. I recorded my commercial with them. Like, it was wild. And it was an internship. So I had produced a television commercial for this company. I was like, I need an internship. I need some internship credits. Let me put this together. I put a commercial together and I contacted the company because I knew their offices were right around the corner from the school. So they come by and they look at it. They're like, this is amazing. They're like, unfortunately, we don't have the budget for television, for advertising on TV because,
TV advertising is way more expensive than radio advertising.
which is probably why you don't make squat in radio. So
Yeah.
they had asked me, could you just write a really good, engaging spot and put it together? So I did. They loved it. This commercial was definitely a little flash of what was going to happen with Jigs and Bigs because there was a ton of innuendo in this commercial. It was ridiculous, but it had to be safe for the radio for them to play. So it was very tongue in cheek and it was awesome. I would hear this spot on the radio and people would call me and say, "Oh my, I just heard you on the radio. That is crazy." I had some of my friends do other voices. It was great. I had, and that was when the bug really bit. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And I just knew that the money wasn't there. So I worked in television. I eventually stopped working for this other disc jockey company so that I could focus on playing live music. And that worked out great again until we got to the point where, like, wife, kids, house, all of this stuff is coming together. And I had decided at that point I was going to start taking events. I had a former coworker reach out to me and she was getting married. And she asked about doing her wedding. And I said, I'd love to. That'd be great. So I contacted my buddy who was in upstate New York. And I said, hey, do you still have that PA gear? I was like, if not, I can rent stuff. But, if you've got that, I'd rather just use that. And he says, absolutely, come pick it up. So we had a great conversation. He's like, dude, run with it. And initially, we had toyed around with the idea of me handling stuff in New England and him handling stuff in upstate New York. He's just got a lot going on. His kids are much younger than mine. So he doesn't have it to put into the business. So I eventually grew this business to where I could just work on my own full time. And it got to a point where working in television, I had been sitting on a letter of resignation for a while. And I'd already talked to my wife about just doing this full time. And I was just waiting for the right opportunity. And the right opportunity eventually did present itself. I had a boss that gave me a annual review and had some questions about my what he called a side hustle, though it was the majority of my income at that time. And I told him, I said, listen, I go, you're asking me for 40 hours of my week where this is not the primary source of income. I said, if you can pay me enough to make it worth it to where I don't need to take a phone call or something while I'm here, I'm like, go ahead. And I gave him a number and he laughed at me. And the next morning I dropped off my letter of resignation. And it was the most liberating thing ever.
I wanted to touch on that before we go on, because I think it's not, it's not just about the money. It's about, you want me to give up my dream of, doing what I love doing. There's really no price for that. Is there? Now you understand when you're a family man, you have to say, okay, well, I'm a family man.
I got to pay the bills.
Pay the bills, get my kids through school, college, whatever I need to do. And at some point, maybe you have to decide, if the money's there, I'll sell out my dream to make you have a better, brighter future for my kids.
For sure.
So it's not about, okay, this is how much. It's not about comparing the money that you were making on your quote unquote side hustle.
Yeah.
It's the money. It's just like, it's not just, paying me enough to cover that for giving that up. It's paying me enough to give up my dream and something that I love doing. And that has a price on it.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're going to negotiate on that, the only chip for me to give up that is the future of my family.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what it came down to. It was, there's value on this time that I'm giving you 40 plus hours a week. And I'm also running a business on that. And actually at this time, I was still playing live music as well. And this was about a window in time. Like, this was about a year or so after I had started actually hosting trivia, because this was an element that sort of was out of the demand. Like, I would DJ in bars when I started my business just to get the exposure and get private bookings. But it's really hard to make that lucrative when you're just basically spinning music that people could just play on a jukebox.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to draw folks in. So that's when I got into game shows. And I started with, I think this is 100% luck that just like our paths crossed at the right time. There was a software company in the UK that they're called Speed Quizzing. And there was nobody in the US except for maybe one or two people that had just started hosting this game, and I had reached out to them and started using their software, and eventually worked my way. It took a few years, but I eventually now I represent them across the entire U.S. So when some host in Florida, Ohio, California is having difficulty with their system and they call tech support in the US, my phone rings. So I'm in charge of all their stuff as well. And I work with a guy. We do some trade shows and stuff. And this sort of kind of opened the doors a little bit and let me realize that there was a lot more. And it was at that point we started doing this that I was just like, I don't need to work in television anymore. I'm like, I don't even know why I'm here. And it was just waiting for that reason to leave. And that reason was exactly what I needed here. Just like you said, not valuing the time that I'm giving you, you know?
One thing that to mention and to touch on is you said you got this software that was like trivia quiz from the UK. A few years ago, actually in 2016, my wife and I went to South Africa. So they're very heavily influenced by British television.
Oh yeah, they
So
are.
when I was in the hotel room at night and I would watch some of their talk shows and trivia talk shows with celebrities, I was like, how do we not have this in the US?
Yeah.
Because there were several, and I can't remember all of them, but there were several shows that I was like, man, this is gold.
Yeah.
And just the fact that it's funny that that software that you got is from the UK, but if you listen to their talk shows, it's in their blood. They love doing those
Exactly.
kind of like fun quiz test,
Mhm.
still like not even game shows, just talk shows that are just awesome. And I was like, man, this is gold over here. And you think a lot of the TV shows now are just like The Office, which one of the biggest sitcoms in the United States.
Mhm.
That's from the UK. And there's others, one example. The one thing about hosting a trivia game show,
Yep.
when you think about it, that's another element that I don't think a lot of people understand. When you remember The Price is Right, Bob Barker.
Oh yeah.
You can't think of The Price is Right without thinking about Bob Barker.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
that's it the personality, the host has to have this captivating personality
Yeah.
that draws the audience in, and his name is going to be synonymous with that game show, and that's not easy to pull out. Heck, my foster daughter who just got married a couple of weeks ago, she asked me to
Yep.
MC her wedding, and I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that. Once I got the mic, I was like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I supposed to do? Where's the script on this?
Oh yeah.
And it's that balance of like, you want to entertain the crowd, but you don't want to. You have to realize, well, in this case, obviously very different than a game show.
Mhm.
The stars of the shows are the wedding couple, not me.
Exactly.
So I
Yep.
have to be. It's to borrow a line from one of my favorite movies, Ocean's 11, when he says, "You have to be." How is it? You have to be forgettable but impactful at the same time.
Yep.
And that's not, I mean, that's not something you can just say, hey, I have this dream, let me do it, and automatically you're going to be doing it. There's a lot of like your background into this, like
Mhm.
your DNA and your personality works with it.
Yeah. You
And
need
just
that.
kind of like it's this path that's been laid down before you since you were
Yep.
little to get to this spot.
It is the weirdest
Yeah.
sort of occupation. And like, it's so funny. One of my cousins, when I first started doing trivia, I was talking to him because, you know, he's worked for himself for a long time. And we were talking and I was like, yeah, man, I think this is the thing. And he's like, dude, you got to do what you got to do. And ironically, this was where I was doing sound for my family owned a dance studio for a long time. And I would handle all of the audio side, all the music. Editing songs, putting things together, and then doing the playback and everything. And it was crazy. He was like, yeah, he's like, you're good at this. You should be doing something with this. Like, you know, it's great that you work in television and you enjoy what you do, but like, if you can get out on your own and do it. And that's where like the Bobby Roast Beef brand really only kind of became a thing in 2005, and not in the world of podcasting, DJing, game shows, or anything. But that brand kind of came into play in live music. Because I was a drummer, and I mentioned earlier, a bad one, but a drummer nonetheless. And what I would do is, I can remember this day crystal clear. I was setting up the studio space where myself and the bass player of this band that I was in were getting things ready. And this guy, he and I were like, we were probably separated at birth. Like I have lived in New England my entire life. He grew up in Staten Island, but like our personalities and everything, it was like the perfect link. And the fact that we were the rhythm section of the band was perfect because it was we would play off of each other and improv and songs all the time, and it was awesome. And I remember we were just making small talk, and he was like, "So, what'd you do this weekend?" And at the time, I was my wife and I weren't together. Our firstborn was with us, and I was like, "Yeah, I just spent the weekend hanging out with Chloe." He's like, "Oh, that's great, man. You and Chloe hanging out all Bobby roast beef style." And I was like, "What?" And I loved it. And he says, and I was like, where the hell did that come from? He's like, oh, he's like, I don't know. I'm just kind of riffing on like the character from Goodfellas, Johnny Roast Beef, who
Oh
meets an
yeah.
untimely end. And I'm like, of course, like there isn't a guy on this planet that doesn't have that movie in their top 10 favorites. I'm like, I'm gonna hang on to that. I'm gonna utilize
That's a
that.
classic.
Oh, it is. And I started using that because like I would play drums for I would back up on a musician, and I was really, really good with promotion. That was the thing I brought to the table with live bands. I was really, really good with getting the word out and promoting and putting people in a room for an event. But the thing is like I wasn't writing songs. My name wasn't on any of this stuff. So what I would do is I would just use this name, Bobby Roast Beef, almost as like a production label, and people would get familiar with that, and it meant something. And then this transition when I got back into DJing, like I actually, it's so funny. I have it, it's buried in this pile across the basement from where I am, but there's a sign from when I worked for that other company as a DJ, and it says, you know, DJ Rob with like all kinds of like glitter and stuff on it. And I used to have to put that sign up on my setup every single time. How many DJ Robs are there in the world? Too many. Too many. It's not memorable, you know? And I've always had this saying, you want to leave them wanting more, but what good is that if they don't remember you? So using the name Bobby Roast Beef made me stand out. It's something that people would remember. And ironically enough, just last night, I was talking with one of the servers at the bar that I worked at for my game show. And she said, I have been meaning to tell you this for months. She says, every single week, at least once, somebody comes in and asks about you, but messes up your name. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah. She goes, so I've been running a list. And she had like a couple of them that were like her favorites were Beefy Mike, uh,
Beefy Mike.
Beef Boy. And then I forget what the other one was, but I'm just like, hey, I'm going to take it. And I asked her, I said, do me a favor and DM those to me so I can line them up with my Google search SEO so that, you know, when folks are looking for, you know, looking me up, but are getting it wrong, they at least get pointed to the right direction, you know? So it's just kind of wild. So it really came to about branding for me. You know, that's what it really was. And that's why I use Bobby Roast Beef for everything, whether it's the fishing podcast, whether it's my trivia podcast, whether it's the game show, whether I'm DJing somebody's wedding, whether I'm officiating a wedding. When I'm officiating a wedding, I'm Padre Roast Beef. You know, people love it.
I like that one.
You know, they love it.
What so you wear different hats. If you
Mhm.
can if you had to stick with one hat for the rest of your life, and that's gonna be not money related. Let's just say either
Passion
one of
related.
those hats would
Yep.
give you the same amount of money.
Yep.
Which one would you go with?
Podcasting 100%.
Yeah.
Yep, full control. I love it. It's my canvas, you know. And it's the thing that I feel like I really do create, and it's brought me like don't get me wrong, I love hosting trivia. I do. I really love it. In fact, most of my old band members have asked me, they're like, here's a quick story. I went out to go see a band with a guy that he played harmonica in a blues band that I was in. And he and I went out to go see this group, and we went out for a couple of beers after the show. And we went to a bar where I hosted trivia. And this was like on a Saturday night, sports bar. And there again, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of these bars have like identity crisis. They're trying to be everything at once. So this sports bar had a DJ, a bunch of college kids. It was a mess. So we go walking in, and we're, you know, he's what, geez, Lenny's got to be 60 now. And, I mean, he's got some years on me. So we're walking in to go grab a couple of drinks. And he's like, yeah, but man, like, does hosting trivia really scratch that itch for performing? Like, are you really getting that out of it? And I was like, absolutely, genuinely. And then, ironically enough, these two college girls that play my game regularly come up to like, oh my God, Bobby Roast Beef, you come out at night and like socialize? It's my God. And he just stopped and looked and he was like, what? Is this for real? Like people notice you and call you by your brand while you're out? I'm like, yeah, it is. And I was like, and the performance end of it, it does. I'm like, and it's something I get to control. I'm not just playing drums for somebody else, backing them up. I'm creating what I'm doing. But podcasting is that on an entirely different level.
Yeah.
Like there are 6 weddings that I have worked right now because of the podcast directly. Because the bride or the groom or the bride have said, I want Bobby Roast Beef to, entertain at our wedding. A couple of them I've done the ceremony, which is crazy to me. And, last summer I had a wedding where the groom came up to me and he's like, oh, I saw your truck with the Hookset Hoodlum sticker. And I got like so excited. I'm just like, really? Awesome, man. I hope I deliver. and I did. It was great. We had a good time. But yeah, podcasting is the definite, like, that's the one where, and I joke that podcasting is my retirement plan. Once I can make it to where I'm able to actually make a living doing the podcasting, and I believe that day is going to come.
Yes. If anybody can do it, I think you can do it, honestly.
Yeah, I think that day is going to come. I'm going to scale back big time on I'm probably going to be hosting game shows until I die, or until I open my mouth and something tremendously offensive comes out and I'm unaware of the ability.
We're only one syllable away from honestly getting canceled, especially when you get, it's not like my podcast, it's very nichey. But yours, you have a brand that it really could, like, literally one syllable could kind of
and we
bring down your empire in a way. You're always gonna have your core followings, but
you gotta
going mainstream and
you gotta be careful.
Yeah.
And we do actually. It's funny. Like, I mean, this last episode that we did. I mean, we weren't even 15 minutes in, and we were talking about cannabis.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was listening to that one. I thought it was funny. It's like, yeah, this is not the typical fishing episode of fishing episodes, or podcasts. I think would tune in and think anybody that picked that as their first episode, they listen to Jigs and Bigs. I'm like, what am I listening to? And I don't mean that in an offensive way or in a negative way. I'm just saying for somebody that's new and hasn't listened to your podcast, that's one of it. You have to listen a little bit more, listen to a few others if that's not your thing, because it's more than that.
Yeah,
it's a lot more than that.
It really is. And it's so funny. It's like, it's even like when I book guests on the show, I don't really necessarily target folks. It's like, I would love to talk about that. Like, there are some instances where I do. A good example is when we had Alex Rudd co-host on our show. And we were specifically talking about,
that was a good show, by the way.
That was, oh man, he is the greatest. Yeah. I love that dude. He's awesome. But like, it was a great conversation that he had on his show. And I felt like I was like, there are people that are not going to listen to that fishing podcast that we will reach. So let's have that conversation here. And I thought it was really, really great. But like, that's one of those rare instances where somebody's talking about something that's timely and I want to get them involved. But like, our last guest, Lance Clark, our guest that's coming up, Jeremy Siebold, all of these guests, they're just, they have something that they're doing. Maybe it's on the tournament level, maybe it's on the content level. Maybe it's got to do with like a brand or they represent a brand and there's a product that they want to talk about, whatever it might be. I kind of just like to put that spotlight everywhere. And I think that the thing that really kind of makes that very apparent was when we had that 12-year-old kid, Vinny, on the show, throwing Senkos. And this came about because it's a friend of the show, knew him and was just like, this kid is a riot. And he is. I got to get him a jig kit and some stickers. But yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, how you've evolved
Yep.
into what you have now. When you talk about radio, we're kind of contemporary here,
Yep.
so we've seen the rise and kind of fall of radio or talk show radios. We remember, we were talking about the pre-recording, Casey Kasem, Kid Craddock was a legend,
Oh yeah.
Howard Stern. Here in Texas, Russ Martin. Yeah, I think it was Russ Martin. I always get
Yep.
confused with the catcher from Major League Baseball. But Russ Martin, that was another one that unfortunately he passed away way too early. But those were the last strongholds of talk show radio.
Mhm.
Before now, it's really if it's not dead, we can safely say at least the golden age of radio talk show is
It's
gone.
Yeah.
It's completely gone. And for better or worse, honestly, I think for better, in the sense that this new social media venues and alternate forms of entertainment
Mhm.
and streaming services have opened up where now not you're not controlled by corporate mentalities or
Yep.
corporate cookie cutter. This is what you have to say. This is
Or
what you cannot say,
yeah,
or this is what you have to promote.
yeah,
One
exactly.
one of my favorite podcast that I listen to, and not that I listen more on YouTube, is Dan Libertard. There used to be, and Stooks, I forgot his last name, from this crew that used to work on ESPN radio and television. Now that they were fired from ESPN, they have their own talk show. And Stooks, and Dan Libertard so liberally about what it meant to being a sellout and being on that niche where it's like this is very corporate mentality, to now
Mhm.
we can free to talk about what we talk about and how it has evolved. When you look at that, growing up for somebody that wanted to be in radio talk shows since he was
Yep.
young, to where it is now, what's been your biggest influence?
So it's funny, like, those names, Casey Kasem and Howard Stern. Howard Stern obviously is an obvious one to pair together.
Yeah.
I think like my biggest influence. So a lot of people will say and ask, like, oh yeah, so you're a DJ. Obviously your influences must be Jazzy Jeff or Jam Master Jay or some of these like true like turntablist artists. For me, it's different. Like my influence really comes. My primary influence is Wolfman Jack. He is my favorite like DJ music icon because he meant so much to the music, but also like he had a brand. The way he looked was part of his brand. The sound of his voice was part of his brand. All of this stuff kind of worked together. And whether it was, his radio shows or you're watching when he was on TV, you kind of knew exactly what that was. And I feel like somebody like Howard Stern kind of like followed right into that. And then, really sort of when the technology changed, because that's what it got down to, was that once terrestrial radio had something to go to and it became satellite radio, and you had that, now you had the difference, because satellite radio didn't have the same constraints that terrestrial radio did with the FCC and everything. So you could do stuff that was a lot more free for the most part, but there's still corporate constraints at that point, I think Stern laid down a lot of the groundwork for a lot of folks, maybe even unknowingly. And like when his show went, and I like to, the thing I think that makes it so obvious is almost like like he saw this in the future, was the fact that he would do his live show and he would do the TV show and then run the TV show on E, and everybody would be able to watch it there. So there was a visual component to it. And it's like that kind of became, you see this in sports radio too. Like up here, we've got, sports radio broadcast as a sports station, NESN. And, they'll do their radio broadcast, but there's a television element there where people can watch this on their TV. So it's being in multiple places at other times. Take that technology and then ramp it up again. And now you've got smartphones in everybody's hands with streaming capabilities, the ability to download content to play it back. And the original podcast, that's what it was. You would download a huge MP3 and play it back. And your RSS feed would just feed that to you every single time that you subscribed. It would be in your inbox ready to listen to. Now it's everywhere. Now you're like, our podcast is on Facebook. That's crazy.
Yeah.
It is insane. So like, the technology is a major player there. I think I don't really know that there's a podcaster so much that's had any type of real like influence directly on what I'm doing right now, mainly because I still feel like the podcast world is the Wild West. Like
Oh
you and I
yeah.
are Lewis and Clark. Like, I mean, we're finding out where we can go. I was just listening to an episode of Cast and Crank. And in there, they were talking about how, like, oh, yeah, we might get more sponsors or something if we didn't drop so many F-bombs or whatever. But at the same time, like, there's value in knowing that you can be organic and authentic to yourself and to your audience, so that your audience doesn't, like I said earlier, like smell a fake. You've got to be organic. But that audience is eventually going to get to a point where the corporate sponsorships, they're going to see value in that and say like, well, maybe it is a good idea to, I don't know if I can curse on your show, but we're going to partner with this company who says these 6 or 7 words that we don't necessarily agree with, something like that. I mean, at the beginning of all the shows, it's in my trivia show, I do this. I play a disclaimer, because there are people that get offended by the questions I might ask. And I don't even write these questions. I buy them. So that this way, I never know what I'm going to ask. Like current events questions is specifically just get people completely unglued. So it's like, it's one of those things where, as long as, you know your audience well, and that audience is continuing to grow, who knows what the future is going to be?
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned that it's just a change in environment.
Yeah.
Radio talk show is almost, like we mentioned, it's past its golden age, that's for sure. I think you touched on it a little bit. Unknowingly, I think Howard Stern, I would consider the godfather of podcasting. Podcasting was not a thing, but when he switched from this corporate cookie cutter radio station mentality to XM radio, got millions of dollars. And let's face it, streaming radio like XM radio, and I think what's the other one? Sirius,
yeah.
Sirius.
And then there was the merger.
Yeah, that was just that bridge between between talk show radio and podcasting. That was just that bridge. That was that one moment in time where technology and social media hadn't met, and that bridge got them to where they are. So even though I don't think Howard Stern pioneered podcasting in the traditional sense, I think that move is what kind of spearheaded. If you look at what Howard Stern was doing, I don't, and not to discredit, like to say Joe Rogan, but kind of opened the door for somebody like Joe Rogan to do his podcast. Yeah. Because now it was kind of like, in a way, socially acceptable to be Howard Stern and still make money. And what you see now, most popular podcast right now is Joe Rogan, and only on Spotify. Like, it was so popular, Spotify will pay you to have exclusive content. And not be on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, whatever other podcasts. That goes to show you the value of, like, corporate saying, we don't care as much of what you're saying as long as you're getting viewership. We don't care about being canceled. We don't care. Just do you. Obviously, everything has a threshold. There's always going to be a line that you cross. That's it. You're going to lose everything, and it's it's a very blurry line that changes from day to day as well. What you could have said yesterday, you may not be able to say today. Another thing I think about it is when you look at not radio, TV and cable TV. I said this a few years ago when my wife was, when you remember back not that long ago, 5-6 years ago, if you wanted internet, they would try to sell you the cable TV. They would say, hey, and you had like a year. You said like, no, I just want internet. And a year after, they were like, yo, okay, if you don't pick up our cable TV subscription, we're gonna cut you off. And I will remember telling my wife, she's like, cable TV is going to be gone in less than 10 years. And sure enough, cable TV is almost died. The only thing that's holding on cable TV is sports, because it's harder to stream sports.
It is.
But it is, with YouTube now, you see now the the other evolution of sports broadcasting,
Yep.
Eli Manning and Peyton Manning doing their
Yes.
streaming, that I think could be the nail in the coffin for cable TV as we speak. Because
Yep.
I think when you look at Pat McAfee, another great sports talk show that ESPN is saying, okay, we see what you're doing in YouTube. We're going to pay you this amount of money for you to bring your content now to ESPN Network, which now
Exactly.
he's on the First Take with Stephen A. Smith and
Oh,
Sharon
yeah.
Sharp. So you see, like ESPN is grabbing and trying to understand. It's like we're only surviving. TV is only surviving because of sports. Sports is one of those things where it's not rewatchable unless it's
Mhm.
highlight. I do have
Yeah.
a few friends that will say, "Hey, I'm recording the game. Don't tell me anything about the game." But like you, with social media, you know how hard it is to not know what the score is and wait till you get home to watch the game. It's not the same thing.
That's exactly it. You've got to stay so isolated
Yeah.
from everything on social media because people are going to be talking, you know?
Yeah.
If you recorded that Jets Bills game from Monday and you're like, "Oh, I'm going to watch it on Thursday when I've got the afternoon available or something like
Yeah.
that. It's going to be great." You're screwed. There's
Yeah.
no way you didn't hear about Aaron Rodgers. There's
Yeah.
no way. And, you know, that's the thing too. It's like cable. It's funny. I took a college course. This was in 1996. I took a college class with a professor. This guy is a genius when it comes to broadcasting and also like media distribution. His name's Kirk Smallman, and Kirk did this course. It was all about electronic media distribution, and at the time, he was like, "I'm telling you, the future is digital satellite."
Yep.
And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he says, "Just because of the financials, if you run a cable company, you've got a bunch of satellite equipment that's receiving all of this stuff at the head end, and then you're literally running wires all over your city, town, county, whatever you cover." And he's like, "The problem is that nature's going to become a factor. You're going to have a tree that's going to push a cable and break a wire. You're going to have to go fix it. It's constant maintenance. So that's why like the cost of cable is so high." Is because the maintenance, it's almost like if they had like it's like the reason why if you go to a mall, you're going to pay more for what you're buying because of the real estate. The
Yep.
overhead on cable is so expensive. And we're in this weird situation where like wireless is great, but it's not perfect yet. It's so close. Like Wi-Fi is wonderful. My trivia game it hinges on a Wi-Fi network, a LAN, not even the internet at all, but on a LAN. And still, there's like crowded channels. There's issues here and there. Bluetooth. I have some equipment that I use professionally that's Bluetooth enabled. I don't use Bluetooth because I'm like, it's gonna drop out. I have like professional grade wireless audio systems to send wireless audio somewhere that I just don't use because wired is permanent, you know? Like you wire something and you're going to get the signal that you want over there. Obviously, you got to maintain that wire, but there's a cost with that. And sometimes that cost is labor, sometimes that actual like sweat equity, other times that cost is just the money, the upkeep for what you're doing. So like I understand why the idea of using cable is great, but you know, it's got its shelf life is getting close to being met.
Yep.
It really is. Technology is a wild thing, man.
Yeah, it changes. So for you, Bobby,
Mhm.
what keeps you up at night when you think about all the changes? Like, do you feel like some point, we don't see, like you're saying, podcasting is still in infancy,
Yeah.
is still allowed for somebody like me to just, it's another idiot talking on the mic and people get to listen to him. Um, but we don't know when that's going to be gone. We don't know when, just like
Yeah.
things come and pass, just like XM radio and Sirius radio. And when you think about it, that was such a little span in time now.
Yeah.
When you're like, I completely forgot that existed.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
it
it's
still exists. You can't buy a new
yeah.
card right now that doesn't come with XM Sirius built in. You
But
know?
who listens to it? Like,
Yeah. Well,
so
there's an audience. I mean,
yeah,
there is an audience. I've got friends of mine that like, and again, like XM, they're not XM Sirius is not stupid. Like they've got an app.
yeah,
So they can, it's just another like streaming option. Like some people, it's so funny. Like some people, especially like we'll use music as an example. Like so many people are, they'll get their music from different situations like maybe they want to support artists directly and they're like, I am not, I mean, and I'm talking about just listening on a device like this.
Yeah.
Some folks are just like, I am only going to support artists directly. So they're buying all of their music through a service and then playing it localized on their device. Or maybe they're using something like Bandcamp, for a vast majority of folks, they're using streaming services like either Tidal or Spotify or Apple Music, Amazon. And then you have other folks that like they don't want to think about it. They don't want to search or make playlists or anything. They just want to have what they like to hear happen. And those are the folks I think that are using stuff like what's that internet radio? Pandora.
Pandora,
Like they're
which is almost gone now. I think
almost, but there are some users.
my wife still uses it. I'm like, that's the third time they played this song in 3 hours. Like, Pandora's done.
It's wild, but they want that radio experience. They just want to be able to turn something on and have it play what they like. So like stuff like that, it's still out there and people can listen to it. So I think that there are enough people that are like, oh, well, and the auto industry, I think, is a big one of how XM Sirius still has customers because people they'll subscribe. And here's hot tip, folks. If you're getting near your subscription and you threaten to cancel, they're going to give you the best deal ever for like 2 more years. And it's just going to keep going. So it's just the way it is. So that's how they keep their numbers up. But now that there's an app, you don't even have to be in your car. Like you can use this anywhere and stream your music, but it's thoughtless. You put a channel on and you're good to go. And, I think the technology, they're smart. They're going to adapt, as much as possible. I have a feeling that we're in a spot right now with content as far as podcasts go, where we're going to see the thing that keeps me up at night is the control of podcasts.
Yeah.
What keeps me up at night is the thought that eventually somebody in the government is going to say, oh, no, we have to filter this.
Yeah.
That's what keeps me up at night because it's been existing this way. And I think it should stay existing this way. Like freedom to put your stuff out there. And again, deal with whatever fallout with listeners or anything like that, but no filters.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those interesting rabbit holes, whether it's, do you let just kind of society clean it out itself?
Yeah.
Or does the government have to intervene? Obviously, I'm not in favor of that because that can always be like, well, there's always, remember, for those that love comics, remember comics used to have this, it all became with this edition of Batman and Robin where people took it as like, well, that's implying something that kids shouldn't. The relationship between Batman and Robin was it implied something that it should be implied to their core followers, which was young kids.
Yep.
So then they became this agency that like governed comics and what you can publish and what you cannot. You have to have that government label. And then I remember when there was this comic on Spider-Man comics, this edition about how Peter Parker was dealing with drug addiction. And when they were coming out with it, the government said, no, we're not going to endorse this. This is not going to have the seal of approval.
Yeah.
And I can't remember back then if it was still Marvel's comics. It might have been another one because I know that talk about mergers and all that. But they decided, we don't care. We're going to still throw this. This is important information.
Yeah.
Some kids do deal with drug addiction.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to, push through with this even without your approval.
Yep.
And it ended up being the death of that government seal of approval because people thought this is so engaging and so important.
Yep.
We no longer care what the government says. It's
Yeah.
good or bad for my kids. We're going to decide. And that ended up being, I think that government approval is still there, but it's been so, so many rules that have been wiped out that it's become really obsolete.
Yeah.
And I think, that's one example of government trying to control a content and society saying, no, I don't think you're right on this.
Yeah.
We will decide what should and should not be. And I mean, there's good and bad things about that.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, I think you let the community decide what they want to do and what they want to listen to and what they want to watch. And if you don't
Yep.
want your kids to watch or listen to something, it's your responsibility as a parent to teach them what's in your mind right or wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's crazy too, because I see this too with in when it comes to music and DJing. Like you'll have this comes up all the time. Every time there's a famous person who does something that's
Yep.
controversial that gets them in hot water. And so for good reason, because some of the things that come out are absolutely terrible things that famous people just absolutely should not get a pass on. So like I'll give you a couple of examples. Michael Jackson, R. Kelly,
Yeah.
right? Playing those songs at events are hot button issues for a lot of people in my industry
Yep.
because you're like, well, is this if I play this R. Kelly song, is somebody going to get upset about this? Like, what's actually going to happen? I've had situations before where like a couple will be like, oh yeah, we definitely want you to play Billie Jean, at our wedding. It's a big hit. Other people are just like, yeah, never play Michael Jackson again. I'm like, what? Like, I get it, but like, it's not an endorsement of
Yeah.
their. I guess it's not an endorsement of their behavior, perhaps, but it's the fact that like this is a song that had a major mainstream impact on a lot of people. And even just for the nostalgia sake alone, most people are separating it. But I've got some folks that are just like, yeah, I won't play any Kanye, and I'm like, maybe because it strikes a personal chord with them,
Yeah.
it's one of these touchy things. And I think that really the only real answer is like, like you said, letting society work it out and sort it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I feel like everybody's too much in everybody's business these days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, mind your business. It's okay.
You can just turn it off, switch channels,
Yep,
mute it,
exactly.
whatever you want to do.
Yeah, like these things, I mean, I don't want to get on any kind of like crazy high horse, but like just everybody take a breath.
Yeah. I remember it's one of the things, I'm going on the rabbit hole here, but I do want to say this, and this doesn't obviously apply to you or Jigs and Bigs, but I do. The only thing that I really do have an issue with is people start knowingly falsifying information just to get a
Mhm.
reaction. That I do have issues with.
Yeah.
But other than that, when people want to express their opinions about something, talk about a subject, as long as you're trying to stay with the facts, you can have your opinion of what happened and what shouldn't happen or what should be done, what shouldn't be done.
Mhm.
And I think, like you said, let society just kind of like weed it out itself, and everybody decides who you want to listen to and who you don't want to listen to.
Exactly.
As far as technology goes, where do you think you see yourself in future or distant future going through the podcast? Like, you're hoping at some point the podcast becomes your main source of income, your full-time job, your 9 to 5, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Other than society, the changes in technologies, do you visualize yourself saying, okay, what's going to be the next move that I'm going to have to do to stay relevant in a way your brand, Bobby Roast Beef, stays relevant and still, enough to earn a check?
So we do kind of have I sort of have a plan for how I want this to go. It is going to require more income coming in because if I'm going to do it, I want to do it right. I do want to incorporate a video component to the podcast. I think the innovation of Spotify offering a video podcast option and the ability of a lot of these podcast platforms incorporating video right into the player is sort of the marriage that has kind of needed to happen. And I feel like my goal, like I mentioned earlier, like Howard Stern would record the show and there was a visual component there. These sports, talk shows would record a show and it would run on television at the same time. I have a feeling that this is where it's going to go. And in my mind, I actually have an example of where I want this to sort of go for the style of show that we are, for the aesthetic, all of this stuff, even down to like designing a set. Like I've got a really, really, really detailed visual model in my mind set up of where this is going to go. And once we get to the point where we have, the partners, I think the biggest thing is growing our partners program. And our partners program is like right now we're working with Dark Horse Tackle, which has been absolutely amazing. I love working with them. We work with Three Bells Outfitters located in Connecticut. We work with Torres Sunglasses Company. And we want to add another retail element, outdoors retail element to there. And this is to kind of provide like a well-rounded service where we can bring value everywhere. And then, we want to sell advertising as well. But part of this is going to be, when we get to a certain point where it can sustain itself, I want to build a studio and provide a full weekly podcast that will run the same duration that it does now, but will have a video element. And that's going to involve hiring a director, hiring camera people, or, investing in cameras that can be manned by a technical director, behind a board, and having a staff to pull this off to make it happen. Because the audio itself is, I can handle that. That's fine. I could even handle putting together the video, but at the same time, I'd rather put my efforts into designing a show and bring somebody in to handle that technical element. So when we grow to that point, that's where I see the technology going, is toward bringing in a visual component, so that this way, the beauty of it is with a podcast player, if you want to, I remember when we first started the show, I got a couple of emails from early listeners that would reach out and say, "Oh my God, I love that you've got this show going. Not only is it like regional to the areas that I fish, but I can definitely relate to everything you guys are talking about. But I don't have to have my phone running a video just displaying nothing as I'm driving." And those content creators are knowing that it's a visual component. So half of what they're talking about is enhanced by being able to see it. The words might not necessarily go over. By knowing that we're audio only right now, we kind of try to be descriptive about everything. So even when, if we have a bait and, we have our jig heads for our live stream recording, that the exclusive for the jig heads, if we're talking about a bait, I'll show the bait and hold it up to the camera like this for them. They'll see it, but I'll describe exactly what I'm doing in the show. And I think that by having it play back in the video format on the podcast platform, it allows you to start and stop it and digest it as you want. Because our show is tough to listen to. Our biggest show tops out at 4.5 hours long. That's
crazy.
That's crazy. And I never intended it to be that way. Somebody had asked me.
Did you have Paul Roberts on the show?
A couple of times. Technically, Paul is on every show right now because of the show open for the FTG segment. Every single, that's him. So no, some of these shows are, because I'll talk for like 60 to 90 minutes with a guest, all on our own. Like we'll just discuss whatever we're going to discuss, and it's great. But the rest of the show with myself and Sean and Joe as co-hosts, and then on the off times that one of them isn't on the show and we have a guest host, I want to give time to them too. So I just let the show naturally be however long it is. If it's got to be 3 to 5 hours, then that's what it's got to be, because that's the beauty about podcasting. The listener can put it down and then go ahead and keep going. And I try to always keep that in mind for the listener. It's like, I imagine our listener sitting there with like an earbud in washing dishes. That's what I think that they're doing. Or, somebody who's maybe, obviously the one that everybody thinks of is commuting in the car, something like that. But, I've had people tell me before, like, I put my headphones on and I've got a big property. I got to cut a lot of grass and I listen to Jigs and Bigs while I do it. And I'm like, that is great. I think that's bananas.
Yeah, you can tell also when there's a tournament going on, you can see, at least on my, I know there's going to be some episodes, especially with the ones Dan records about tips and tricks to help you improve your bass fishing. Every time there's a tournament going on, you'll see a spike in his listeners, because people driving up to the boat ramp just want to get more information and kind of like get them into the fishing mentality.
For sure.
Speaking of that, perfect segue. We talked about your personality as your influences, radio, emceeing, talk show, trivia, game host show, podcasting. How does fishing and the Bobby roast beef media world combined to bring us jigs and bigs?
So here's what's wild. I got into fishing. I fished as a young kid with my dad. He was, we would fish for trout quite often using live bait. And, I was one of these kids that needed to just chuck and wind. And I didn't have the interest in it. And then I got, to like about high school age and kind of put it down. I didn't really get out and fish maybe once or twice maximum, but never like because I was driven to go and fish. Like it was just like, oh, that's what we're going to go do. We're going to go fishing. Great. I didn't really put a whole lot of stock into it. And then I got into my early 30s and my buddy Paul, and I talk about Paul a lot on the show. My buddy Paul had said to me, he's like, I had called him up and I asked him, I was like, what are you doing this weekend? He's, I got the weekend available. He's like, he's like, I'm just going to go out and do some fishing, man. And he goes, you should come with me. And I'm like, fishing, really? All right, I'll give it a go. So I got myself a spinning combo. We went out and just fished and it was ridiculous. Nothing was caught. I think we went out in like the last week of March. It was crazy cold. Like we had no idea what we were doing. And my buddy would fish with his father-in-law. So he would go out with his father-in-law and they would just fish for whatever, catch whatever it was that was biting that day. Everything went in a bucket. They ate everything they kept. It was one of those things. And this was about the time where the subscription box service was really new. And I always had an interest in artificial lures. I wish I had that box in front of me. I could show you. There's a lure that my father gave me. I remember when I was a little kid, he had a giant tackle box with like the 3 trays that lifted up. And he had this, it was like a crawler style lure, but it was a bat. And as a little kid, I was amazed by this bait. And I always wanted to throw it. And my dad never had the right gear for this stuff. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a huge crawler. It probably weighs half an ounce, but it just had my attention. And I remember thinking about that. And I was like, what is it about bass fishing? Like bass specifically, why is this blowing up like it is? Like I was aware that the tournament element of it was as big as it was, like on the level of MLF and Bassmaster. I didn't have a foot in that game at all. Didn't pay attention to it. I'm not really a sports guy at all, but I knew that there was something about this. So I found I subscribed to Tackle Grab was the first subscription box I ever signed up for.
Never even heard of that one. Tackle Grab.
Tackle Grab. Yeah. And it was actually, I think it came out like right around the same time, maybe even a little bit before Lucky Tackle Box came out, and then Mystery Tackle Box, I think, came out after that. But I had Tackle Grab. I basically bought because I had no idea when I would go to like Walmart and look for baits. I would not step foot into a tackle shop proper because I had no idea what I was doing. You know what I mean? And I was like, I'm 30 something years old. I should know what the hell a jig does. I have no idea. So what I did was I subscribed to one of these things and they would send out a card and I would research the baits that came in there. And like first thing I started throwing from them was a square bill crankbait. It was an Ish Monroe. I think it was called a Big Papa. And that was the first artificial bait I ever caught a fish on. Caught a largemouth with it. I was like, whoa, there's something here. Let's play around with this. So I would dive in just purely for recreation. And for me, it was, like I said, at the time I was playing in bands. I was working full time. I had 2 young kids at home. I was also hosting trivia, and I would do private events on the weekends on occasion. So on those weekends where I was available and it would lend itself to it, I would go out and I would just fish, just enjoy myself, 2 or 3 hours bank fishing. And it got to a point where eventually I started catching fish on more different presentations, and I started to kind of grasp a little bit more of what I was doing. Like I was getting some more knowledge, and I still was going out and getting skunked most of the time, but I was slowly putting the pieces together. And then my buddy Paul and I went out, and our jig heads know the full details of this story, but we went out and we had fished there's a local reservoir to us called Quabbin Reservoir. It's enormous. And it's actually the drinking supply for the city of Boston. And they are very strict on the rules for what they'll allow in there for watercraft. Like I can't bring my kayak there. I would have to rent one of theirs.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, if I wanted to use a boat, my own boat, my outboard has to be no more than 25 horse, and I have to. There's a seal that they put on your boat. Like they clean the boat and they give you a sticker as a seal saying that it's been certified. If I go to another body of water, I have to. If that I basically can only use that boat in that body of water. But this is a reservoir it's enormous. It's probably the best fishery in Massachusetts, to be perfectly honest. And we went out this one cold April day, and we just had the worst time ever. And mistakes were made, and I'm at the back of the boat, and I'm in charge of the motor, and I say to Paul, I go, hey, let's head back to I got to handle some business. Let's head back to the ramp. We're nearby. We go by, and I go to turn to grab the transom with my other hand. I turn around, and the outboard just kicks to the left, and immediately, this is at full throttle. Immediately, the front of the boat rises up. I'm looking at my buddy, 300-pound man, looking above him. I was wearing my sunglasses at the time, and I had the water level right here. I was like, oh my God. I reached behind me, and I grabbed the choke, and I pulled it, and the boat went and righted itself right back down. We came so close to death that day. It was ridiculous. And so I couldn't believe when I got back from handling business that he was okay with going back out. He was. So we went out. I say everything was great. Everything was great in the sense that we didn't die. That was how great it was. It was a terrible day of fishing. I actually recorded a video just saying, like, we're bad at this. If something happens and you find this video, we're idiots and we shouldn't be doing this. And I put fishing down for about a year. And I was just like, I'm not seeing the success that I want to, I'm not, it's at the point I was trying to learn so much that it was actually stressing me out to fish when it was supposed to be relaxing. And I'm like, I got to rethink this. About a year went by, and a guy who works security at one of the bars that I work at, we were talking about fishing. And, I was still in the loop. Like I was watching all of this fishing content. I just wasn't going out like I was. I also didn't have any baits coming in or anything like that at all. So he says to me, he's like, hey, why don't we go out tomorrow morning? I said, you know what? It's going to be a pretty nice day. Why don't we? Screw it. I'll grab my rods and we'll go. Man, it only took 2 or 3 casts, and I laid into a 3-pounder that just instantly, like, relapse everything. I'm like, we're back, baby. And I'm just, from that point on, I kind of made fishing right about that point. I started doing, because I lost like 40 pounds right about that time. I started hitting the gym hard, and I would go and work out. I was watching my diet and everything else. And I've actually maintained that weight that entire time, which is great. I mean, I'm still a fat son of a gun, but it is what it is. I'm 40 pounds less. So I felt pretty good about that. And I would use fishing to like extend that physical activity because it was all bank fishing. And then the podcast happened when COVID started. I decided to start making that happen. And that's when I started to really get really serious about fishing. And it was talking with Sean and creating a database and following the trends that I could see. And even right now, I'm not even like looking at that database. I'm just collecting data. And the whole purpose for that is just to create and really, I'm on an adventure. I'm not a tournament angler. I'm not into that. I'm just trying to get the most out of fishing and enjoy as much of the natural resources that we have as much as humanly possible. So this is where the travel element comes from, and trying to go to different areas. I went to Moosehead Lake, and even the camping and the overlanding stuff that I'm into, which I say overlanding, it's overlanding mild. I like to say it's not so stealth camping. That's what it is. But that element comes in so I can extend the adventure past going to a body of water a few hours away and then driving back. Now I can go and spend a day traveling to a spot, fish that entire day, stay overnight, and then come back and do that whole thing in a weekend. It's well worth it to do. So the adventure is what I'm chasing, and that's part of the reason why we started doing the multi-species scavenger hunt style tournaments, was so that this way anybody could just go out and catch fish and sort of prioritize their fishing in a different sort of way.
That's awesome. One of the things that I take from that is that I find interesting, at least to me, is when you think about your job or your career as, an entertainer, MC, all those hats that we already talked about,
Hmm.
that I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like it came easy to you because of your DNA, your personality.
Yep.
It caters perfectly to who you are. And then it looks like, it seems like fishing and bass fishing was the yin to your yang. Now
Yeah.
this is
Yep.
something that's challenged you to the core, which I think it's what a lot of people don't understand about fishing and bass fishing, because there's a lot easier ways to fish. There's a lot easier fish to catch than a bass. In that scope of bass fishing,
Yep.
bass is still a bass. It's not a smart animal, but it is smarter than harder to catch than other fish, because
Oh yeah.
it's still a bass. It's like saying, well, it's just the smartest horse ever. It's still a horse kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's still a fish, but it's that challenge you to do something for no other reason than to entertain yourself. Because when you think about it, especially if you're catch and release, what a lot of people don't understand, and I don't know how to describe it, right? But we're doing something that's really, really hard. We're doing it in the hardest way possible to do it.
Hmm.
For what reason? If it's just to challenge ourselves and
Yeah.
make something better of ourselves and to overcome something.
Hmm.
Does that make sense to you?
Oh
Doing something for your life that comes easy to you, to doing a hobby that's probably the hardest hobby you can
oh
think
yeah.
of.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's exactly what it gets down to. It's that it's such a crazy combination of elements. Like I like to always tell people that fishing is a unique pastime, hobby, sport, whatever category you want to lump it into. It's unique because it's one part science and one part art. And you've got on one hand a bunch of absolutes, and then you've got chaos on the other hand, and you put those together and you've got fishing. So whether you're using artificials, whether you're using live baits, whether you're exclusive to one type of bait, maybe you're only throwing giant swim baits, or you're only throwing finesse, or you're like you're just exclusively fly fishing or something like that. It's crazy because you're 100% right. You're doing something that is challenging you, you know um but at the same time, it's also relaxing in an
Yeah.
odd kind of way. And I think the magic of fishing is that it's taking you literally out of your everyday mindset into a natural environment and making you go figure it out. You know, we always talk about getting on a pattern or figuring out a pattern. Like that's going to lead you to an amazing day of fishing. If you can figure out the pattern, boom, great. It's a puzzle. So it's almost like the way somebody relaxes by doing like Sudoku or crossword or something like that.
Yeah.
It takes you out of that day-to-day element, and you're literally putting together a puzzle, but you're doing it in a natural environment, physically taking you out of that cubicle you might be in 9 to
Yeah.
5 Monday through Friday, and allowing you, so even though you're being challenged, in a way you're releasing all of that additional stress, you're letting all that kind of melt away. And that's really important. I think that's the most important part of the outdoors.
Yeah, and like there's so many levels to it, because like you mentioned, it takes you out of your cubicle, it takes you out of your comfort level physically, and it takes you out of your comfort level emotionally and mentally, because
Yep.
it can be mentally, emotionally draining when you're not catching a fish. And I think not to go down that rabbit hole too much, but when people now talk about, the hottest topic right now in fishing, which is forward facing sonar, live
Knew it.
imaging,
Yep.
I'm not against or pro anything.
Yeah.
Do you, boo? Like we were
Yep.
talking about podcast. Listen to whatever you want to listen, watch whatever you want to watch. It's your life. You do what you want to do. It's fishing. You do what you want to do. But I understand the argument of, like, when you think about, okay, what's the hardest fish to catch? Bass. But typically, on most lakes, you can catch a catfish by throwing some chicken liver, and you
Yep.
probably end
Oh
up
yeah.
catching something. What is the hardest way to catch a bass? Now, not only am I targeting the hardest fish to catch, but what's the hardest way to catch it? Because you can throw a live minnow and come up with a decent day of fishing, and it's pretty
Oh yeah.
easy. No, we're not gonna use the live bait, even though that's a whole lot easier. We're gonna use a artificial lure. So,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we're going to forward facing sonar and live imaging, which is the anti bass fishing mentality. All we've done in fishing is look for the hardest fish to catch with the not just the hardest fish to catch, but with the absolute hardest way to catch it, which is
Yep.
don't go live bait. But now we're going to bring in a live forward facing sonar. So I
Yeah.
see the arguments on both sides.
Oh
Like
sure.
it's the anti bass fishing
Yeah,
mentality.
yeah.
And that, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole that we go down to. But I see how this kind of like is something that a lot of people, unless you do it, you don't understand that there's a reel from this actor that used to be from that movie Terminator, where he talks about, I don't even know what show it is. I know it's a screen recording of a show, I'm sure,
Mhm.
but it was brought up, and we see it all the time in social media, where he explains why fishing is so important to him. I'm sure you've seen it.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I think that captures the moment right there. That's the best way to describe it. It's hard to describe it to other people.
Yep.
What I find interesting is how you manage to bring those two worlds and make something out of it.
Mhm.
Typically people say my work life is my work life and
Mhm.
my fishing life is my fishing life, and I don't want to combine them.
Yeah.
One, offsets the other in a
Yep.
way.
Yep.
One keeps me pays my bill, the other one puts a hole in my account,
In my
but
pocket. Yeah.
it brings me some sort of entertainment and pressure relief button. But you managed to do both things and merge them together in a
Mhm.
way that I think it's really unique. And the great thing about it, it reflects, like one reflects in the other, like your personality from what you did before you started bass fishing.
Yep.
In a way, it's enhanced by fishing when you bring it to your podcast and to your social media.
Oh
Did
yeah.
you ever thought that was going to happen?
It kind of. At least I should say, it's one of those things that I always hoped would happen. Like I would find some way to comfortably merge these two things together, and it's not for everybody. Like you hear this all the time with content creators, and you hear them talk about burnout,
Yep.
and it's a real thing. It becomes part of a job. Like I'll tell you, I think one of the best examples of this is if you're going to do this full time, it's tough. And I've been lucky enough there's a couple of content creators that I've gotten to be really, really close with that are in my area, and that's Todd Grubb and Fishing with Becca Yassine.
Yeah.
Um, and between the two of them, they're very different in a lot of ways, though they do a lot of content together, or they did before. Um, Becca is she's a full-time content creator. Like that is what she does now. When she first started doing this, it was just like she was just creating the content. And I think at the time she was like a nanny, actually. And she makes really, really great content. She has a good schedule. She went really hard during the pandemic, trying to put like crazy amounts of content out. Um, and she's done some really great things. I'm really proud of her. Like I really am. And I feel like she's somebody out there that gets it. I think that she's kind of, I almost say that I think she's kind of got it dialed with this like work life balance with her content, because part of being a content creator is like opening up to your audience, like what your life is all about. So, like on Jigs and Bigs, I will talk about all of the stuff that we've got going on. Like in this episode, I was talking about how I was doing a lot of prep so that I have a trip this weekend to Camp Hookset with all the Hookset Hoodlums Pro staff that I'm looking forward to. But I have a wedding on Monday so I've got to go from like fishing
Waiting
hard.
on Monday?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting sort of situation. Yeah, I have a
Mm.
wedding to do on Monday. So I'm going to be gone for this entire event, and I come home and then I got to be in wedding mode. So I talked about that a little bit on the show. And as a content creator, like you're always sort of sharing that. And I think that you have to like really be honest with yourself with how much are you gonna like put out there for that. And I think she's really kind of got it really dialed. There's a lot of stuff that she's been doing that's fantastic. You look at like Todd Grubb on the other hand, and here's a guy who started creating content and had varying success to a specific point, but then eventually made it to where fishing is his life. Like for a while, this is when he took a deep dive into saltwater fishing. He was working on party boats, going out on chasing like trophy tog, and the adventures he's had on the saltwater is absolutely insane. But then he's been mixing it up, where now he's been getting heavily into carp fishing, and with that, he just created a new partnership with an amazing domestic retailer for carp fishing gear, and that's kind of opening a lot of doors for him to travel and create some other stuff. And with doing this, you see him kind of building more and more. Now he's a captain. He's a captain now, and he's working at an amazing custom rod shop, part time, and he's filling out those hours creating content. And I use those two as an example because, like, you see a lot of people that get into this and they go so hard for a year or two and they get burnt out so badly. And they're going to try to create like, oh, I'm going to do 10 TikToks a week. I'm going to do 3 or 4 videos a week. I'm going to record 2 podcasts every week or whatever that schedule is. And you got to look at like, what are you able to deliver realistically? And, you obviously, the hope is that you're always going to grow to a point where you can do this full time if you want to do it full, because that's the thing. Just like where fishing can be something different for everybody involved, it's something different for the tournament angler than it is for that dad that gets to go out twice a month, or that guy who books that one fishing trip a year for salmon fishing in the Salmon River or something like that. Like, there are folks that do this at different levels, and it can be okay. There's space for everybody. But I think that like that's a big thing, is like avoiding burnout and trying to balance that work, that content creator, and that actual living your own life sort of balance to kind of tie it together.
One of the things that I'm really interested to get your feedback on, we see different styles of like um, podcasting. One of my favorite ones, and it's very different in contrast to what you do, is like Lex Friedman. Lex Friedman, I don't know if you have seen him or heard his podcast or watch him on YouTube. He's one of those, he's a great interviewer. So he relies heavily on the questions he asked.
Yeah.
And his guest bringing the content. Like,
yep.
He's more there of like he's just a vessel to get the information out. He's not the main attraction.
Yeah.
Although his podcast is one of the most popular ones out there.
Yep.
When you see your podcast, obviously Bobby Roastbeef is his big personality. Unlike, let's say, Lex Friedman, people don't tune in necessarily for your guests, but to listen, watch, get entertained by primarily Bobby Roastbeef.
Yep.
How do you balance that out when you have your guests? Because the truth of the matter is now you have people that's like, I'm here for Bobby Roastbeef.
Yep.
But you also want to highlight your guest and bring them into the spotlight. Where do you find that a balance to, transmit what you want to transmit in your podcast?
So I love that question, because it's funny. I do have a list of core questions that I will utilize. And I always, when it's funny, I started doing the podcast specifically because I wanted I wanted to try to be that facilitator of the interview. I was coming to it from a position of, I am not 100% sure about what I'm talking about here. I may get some stuff wrong. So I was taking the little about that experience from the perspective of like, hey, I'm just really getting into this world head on of hardcore fishing. Like, who can I talk to put this together? And I started out the show primarily just trying to spotlight other guests. So I would have a conversation with the people around me, which eventually grew to the followers that I would create and generate on Instagram, and those connections would then grow to other connections. So I was reaching out to people. Like there's a guest we've had on twice already. He's a guy in North Carolina. His name's Jordan Capone. And Jordan came on the show. He was the first guest that I had that was completely out from like left field, like strictly Instagram. We had talked, and actually I joke in the first episode because he is originally from Canada. I was like, he's my first international guest. It was like episode 6, and we had a great conversation. It was really, really good. But like I would ask, I had a list of typical questions that I would go. And then the one thing I've tried to pride myself on is the follow-up question. I think any really good interviewer needs to be able to have a good follow-up. So yes, there are questions that I'll ask about. So let's talk about your confidence baits. What is such and such? And if they say something that's interesting, I can riff off of that and get something more. And I think the goal is to just create an organic conversation. Now, I've never strayed from those staple questions. I don't necessarily ask all of them, and here's why. Because when I'm booking a guest, there are some guests that are, and I'm sure you've run into this too. You have some people that are on the other side of the screen that are talkers, and you have some that aren't.
Yeah.
So you'll ask, like, so do you have any, bucket list bodies of water that you want to, make sure to get out and fish? And they're like, yep. And you're like, care to elaborate on that? Like, that is, it's one of those, you do get folks that are like that. And it's not to downplay any of them, but some folks just aren't.
Just a personality. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like, and it's okay to be that person, but it generally what I find is just making them as comfortable as possible and having a conversation. So if they're not sharing any stories, I'll share some of mine and then put that out there and then sort of see like if I can get more out of them by even if it's just a little bit of feedback on, I might tell that story about, almost killing my best friend on the Quabbin Reservoir or something like that. And that might elicit a reaction from them or something. And the very last question, which has been in almost every single show, is the 2-parter, the one where we want like that, the question where we want where they're most proud, and then the follow-up, the question is the biggest epic fail moment. Like that's we talk a lot about that, and I try to get that to show the contrast because everybody's got dozens of epic fail moments. But I also want to hear that story. Like if you were at the bar at a wedding and you're like meeting the other family's kind of wild angling uncle or whomever, and they say, "Yeah, I hear you like to fish. What's that story you're going to tell?" That the one that sticks out to you the most, and that contrast is very interesting because everybody can relate.
Yeah, and that's interesting, having that structure. You're not just relying on your personality, which,
Yep.
and again, I apologize to my audience. I'm truly trying to get over this sinus infection. So I'm pushing through, guys. So if you hear me coughing and all that, I do apologize. But you could really rely on just your personality because it carries most of the show, or it could carry most of the show if you wanted to, but you do find that strike balance, which I think keeps it more leveled. It keeps it more interesting because if the show is heavily relied on the personality of Bobby Roast Beef, it could have the potential of getting stale. Kind of becomes repetitive. But when you bring another guest in and you let play off of each other and find that, like you said, it's not always easy with some guests. I've had some guests where it's like, golly, I wish we just say more than 3 syllables. Kind of help me out here. And I mean, there's ways to prepare for it, but at the same time, you're at the mercy of whatever the person's gonna say.
Exactly.
You don't, as much as you talked about it in the pre-recording, there are things that you're gonna come up and you have to either find a way to make what they say more interesting, or find a way to kind of tone yourself down and avoid from you saying something that's probably gonna kill the momentum of where the show goes. And that's a balance that I don't think, at least for my part, not having any background into kind of quote unquote entertainment business.
Yep.
I'd say that loosely.
Yeah.
it's a lot of like trials and errors. When you think about your progression in the podcasting, what has been for you the biggest change from when you started to where you are now?
I think my confidence in this show is a major thing. Like, it's so funny. I've always tried to avoid painting ourselves into a corner in any kind of a way, even just in being a fishing podcast. I tell people all the time, I'm like, even if you don't fish, you should listen to this show because it's entertaining as hell. And it's just coming from the standpoint of a handful of crazy freshwater anglers. So I think my confidence has been the major change. Um, I'll give you an example, like regarding like guests. I have in the past with tournament anglers specifically, like in the beginning when it was just myself, I was relying 100% on the guest, that conversation, and where it was going to go. I would share my feedback of what I've been doing in the past week and such. And then, when I brought Sean into the mix as a regular element of the show, I feel like the show really started to kind of focus more on one specific niche, and that was kayak anglers. As a whole, whether they be recreational anglers or competitive. And I can remember there was a time where we would get somebody on the show that was a kayak angler. We had a tournament angler. Ken Wood is one that comes to mind specifically. And I would ask Sean, I'd say, hey, I want you to be a part of this interview because there's a certain level of, I don't know what the hell this is all about because I don't have a vested interest on it. I'd like your feedback with some of this as well. And it's worked. And actually it's funny because I have a recording set up for this Saturday night that our newest co-host, Joe Brown, had put together. It's Josh Codier. He is the AOY winner of Joe's league that he's been fishing in, which is pretty awesome because I guess Josh is a really good dude. It'll be a good interview. But again, like I told Joe, and Joe actually had asked, he's like, I would love to be a part of that if it's possible. I said, well, you're going to be at Camp Hookset, so let's record then. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to record with him. But now I get, Joe was brought into the mix because he has a whole other background in terms of fishing than either Sean or myself. Like Sean's got years of experience and his primary focus in that has been kayak fishing specific. I'm all over the place. Joe owns a beautiful glitter rocket. A beautiful Skeeter that matches my truck. I'll say it again. And he is more vested into that world, the world of the big boat fishing tournaments, the MLF, the Bassmaster, all this stuff. He's got a head more on there. But on top of that, Joe owned a tackle shop. So he's got the retail experience of all of the gear. And this is providing like another brand new unique spin. So like my confidence has changed where I can sit down and talk to almost anybody now, but I still like to have that element in there to bring in various perspectives. And like the primary reason why we added Joe is because I didn't want to keep us in, like, I don't want people to make the assumption that Jigs and Bigs was a kayak fishing podcast. I wanted them to know that it was a fishing podcast. Mostly bass fishing, but we appreciate multi-species fishing as well.
Yeah, and it's that diversity of your show. When you listen to it the first time, depending on what episode, you might not even think other than because of the title, Jigs and Bigs, that it is related to bass fishing. That's what I love about it. It's like, and a lot of people can relate to it. And it's just free-flowing conversations where your personality shines, but it doesn't overtake, and hug kind of like all the attention. So I mean, your years of experience doing this, your whole DNA and your personality from your childhood has led you up to this, and you've done a masterful job at what you're doing. I think anybody that's watching or listening to this podcast, if you haven't listened to Jigs and Bigs, I would definitely recommend it, because it's far, it's entertaining. I forgot I was gonna use a word, but I just halfway through the word, I was like, what word am I using? Fart?
Yeah.
Whatever. It's like it's entertaining. Just listen to it. I don't know where I'm going. It's early today. I don't usually record in the morning, but since we are pre-recording,
I love recording this early. I
really?
live for this. Oh, I love it. Oh, it's great. Have a coffee, and then I feel like, I don't know, there's something I love recording early and then just having that in the can and knowing that we're good to go. I love it this time. I'll tell you, like I think the most entertaining episodes that we have are the ones where, being the fact that we're based up north in New England, we really get to fish for like 7 months out of the year. I mean, realistically, like, no, more than that, probably more like 9. It all depends on how bad of a winter we get.
Yeah.
I mean, and none of us on the show are really hardcore ice anglers. For us, it's more of a social call a lot of the time. And
Yeah.
ice fishermen are unique because like they will wait all year for that 3-month window where they can be on the ice. And they love it. They absolutely love it. And then the rest of the year, they're just like, I wish winter would come back. So for us, we'll talk about ice fishing, and we've got, jig heads that are really, really heavy into it. So we've got reports of, what's going on, which bodies of water have safe ice, because that's a big deal. Like, especially for going out with groups of people, like you want to know where there is safe ice. And, we run a fishing report that's really good. And I'm actually kind of thinking that maybe we should extend that into the ice fishing as well, because normally we shut it off until spring. So we do that locally, which is odd for a podcast because we have listeners all over the country, all over the world. And, to keep something that's so localized, I just kind of feel like it puts our little style on it a little bit, because we are New England guys, we're all New England natives, we're all massholes, Armando. That's what we are. And I feel like that's kind of definitely interesting, but you'll see in those winter episodes, we kind of go off the rails. Like last winter, we had one of our listeners who's another tournament angler from our area, Bill Galekis. He was actually a tournament director for one of the local trails. He's also really big into like geek culture, just like Sean is, and just like I am. So we had this segment that we called Geekin' with Galekis, where we would talk comic books, movies, stand-up comedy, music, anything in there where we could sort of geek out on. And that would be like the final segment of the show. And it was just to add a little bit of value to what's going on. We've had conversations about incorporating fishing video games, which I think would probably be best served when we do have a video component, but maybe it's something that we start now, and then we play with later. So we try to add as much as we can in there. And then, obviously up north here, once you get into January, you start getting all these expos that will pop up. People are looking to sell used gears. People are looking to sell new gear. Everybody's ramping up for spring. So we try to, really, really sort of take advantage of that time to create really great content that's focused on prep. And especially this year, now that we're going to have Joe for the entire winter season, now we can talk boat prep, stuff that I've got no idea about, winterizing your boat. How does that happen? Why? I mean, I've got a kayak. I wrap it up in the backyard and it just stays there, so it's interesting. And eventually, someday, I'd like to maybe see there be a water-based Jigs and Bigs studio where I could fish with guests on a boat, maybe a big pontoon boat to make it a studio and make it work. But I think that would be really amazing too. So who knows what's going to happen? But I definitely think that that for the entertainment value, those winter months get crazy.
Yeah.
They get nuts.
It's something I think a lot of people don't understand if you're living down south, because when I've had buddies of mine that moved, like I had one of my best friends moved from Puerto Rico to upstate New York, and he said, dude, when it's wide out,
Forget
like
it.
over there, and like almost there, he was almost in Canada. It's like your mind just goes into a different state of mind. Like you're just in a different state of mind, different emotional, because you're like wide out, like snowed in for so long. Outdoors activities are, very minimal
Very
and
minimal,
maybe not that enjoyable unless you really hardcore love that weather. And
Yep.
from somebody that used to born in the Caribbean, lived in the Caribbean, it was like, your mindset just it's all over the place. And I think a lot of people from the South really don't understand that. Like
Yeah.
I can see how that would get crazy having friends from North that just have a different mentality when you like it's bitter, it's cold, and there's nothing to do.
Oh yeah.
It just puts you in a different state of mind, which a lot of people here from the South cannot relate because the most we're going to get in snow is maybe a couple of days,
Yeah.
but that's
Exactly.
about it. And it would be nothing compared to what you guys go through, obviously.
And
Even with the Snowmageddon 3 years ago, it was just like really one or two hard days of snow and sleet. But after that, it was just kind of back to normal.
That's the thing. It's like it's just a flash in the pan. Like we see it all
Yeah.
the time, especially working in the news business, like I did for so long working in television. You would see like the Carolinas got freezing weather, and like it was chaos on the roads.
Yeah.
Like up here in the Northeast, we laugh so hard when we see that footage.
It's Tuesday for you guys.
It's just another day.
Yeah.
But I understand the situation. Like they're not used to that. So like this last winter, I can remember we were doing the Springfield Sportsman Show in Springfield, Mass, and I was 2 weeks out from taking my buddy Paul, who had, by the way, Paul has never been on a bass boat before, never, and I've been telling him forever, dude, the best fishing is done on somebody else's boat. That is the best it's gonna get. And I told him, I was like, we should take a trip and go to one of these bodies of water. Where do you want to go? And Paul is just so laid back. He's like, where do you think we should go? And it was after I had Alex Rudd on the show. He had mentioned Caleb Bell, a guide from Bass Quest Charters in Tennessee, and he fishes on Chickamauga. And I contacted him and I was like, listen, I'd like to book a weekend, man. Let's go and do it. And he was like, all right, cool. So I booked the time. We stayed at a tackle shop. And this is going to be an annual thing. We're going to be going to a body of water down south to get that open water fix at least once a year in the winter. At least. That's my goal right now. Like I went through a bunch of states that I want to go to. Some of those are for the summer. Like I want to go to Wisconsin or Michigan in the summer, and fish open water. But in the winter, I'd love to go to Florida, and go with a guide on a body of water I have no business on. I'd love to go to Gunnersville, and be able to fish in these spots. I think that is I think the biggest release. It's almost like, I don't know if they have the term out where you're at, snowbirds. Probably.
Oh yeah, I was just about to say, are you going to become a snowbird?
In a way, I mean, it's funny too. My wife and I were talking about this because we're like, our kids are older. My oldest one is almost 20. My youngest is just about to go into high school. And, we're talking about, what our next like couple of decades might look like. 3 decades, maybe. What's the plan? Are we going to stay up here? What do we want to do? And my wife kind of loves this idea of going down south in the winter and getting like a seasonal camp, like a mobile home, really.
Yeah.
And setting it up down there and then having a rig that we can travel around in and just come up north and then stay either on some of my family's property or her family's property or something like that, come up here for a few months and just live like that. I should say,
my lovely wife has never really camped a day in her life. She gonna learn.
She is gonna learn.
Either that or lawyers are going to be on the phone.
Yeah, exactly. One or the other. But it's wild because like, it was a 15-hour drive to Hickson when we were in Tennessee, and it was worth every mile. It was worth every mile for that one day of fishing. The fishing wasn't fantastic. The conditions were crazy, but the memories that were created and the shit that was talked on that boat was just chef's kiss. It was great. And the beauty of it is every time I've done one of these trips, I have brought recording gear with me and recorded content for the show right there. I even did it when I was in Moosehead. We had no internet at all. I recorded a segment with Delirious Angler, and we had ourselves a great time at Moosehead. It was awesome. And that was up in Maine. I mean, yeah, I think if I had any advice for anybody, travel. Yeah. Just grab your rods, sleep in your car, and go.
And the beauty about your podcast and going back full circle when that job offer was like, okay, how much would it take for you to quit your side job and stay here?
Yep.
And you named your price. When you think about how fortunate you were to not get that match,
Oh
you
yeah.
not get what you asked for. It's so beautiful to see how your podcast and what you're doing, the Bobby roast beef brand now is taking you places. It's
Yeah.
typically it's like my job is my job and I have to leave on vacation to forget about my job.
Yeah.
But it's such a beautiful
There is an obstacle
place.
though.
Yeah.
There
But it's
is
just
an
a beautiful place
Yep.
when you're in life, at your point in life,
Oh
where
yeah.
your job is like, my job is taking me, whoops, sorry about that. My job is taking me to where I love to do
Yes.
what I love to do. But you mentioned there's an obstacle. What is that obstacle?
That obstacle is that so when you work for yourself, you don't get vacation time.
Yeah.
So like this recently, my plan was to do some fishing in South Carolina. My wife and kids wanted to go back to the Myrtle Beach area. And I was like, let's do it. Let's go ahead. So we blocked out this week. It was awesome. And then I realized I was just like, man, I'm like, I have such a full schedule of events that week that if I cancel all these events, and these aren't private events, they're residency events at bars and restaurants, but I'm like, I'm losing so much income that month specifically. I said to my wife, I was like, you guys go take my credit card and have fun, don't have too much fun, but have fun. And, you know, I will stay here and work that week. And I did some stuff while I was up here. I fished every single day. It was awesome. I don't think there was a day that I didn't have my kayak trailer on the back of my Forerunner. Like there was every single day I was going out to some body of water and doing some sort of fishing. And it was a blast. I had a great time doing it. It was great. The challenge is, I'll give you a perfect example. Like we're doing an appearance at the Columbus, Ohio Fishing Expo in February with Dark Horse Tackle. Now, Dark Horse has been like Josh and Zach are amazing. Like those dudes are amazing. If this has been the perfect matchup of personality
Yeah.
and like-mindedness for growth that ever could have existed. Like it is fantastic. And they've been gracious enough to invite myself to be a part of their booth over at the Columbus Fishing Expo, which we're really looking forward to. In fact, if you're planning on being there, come by because they have a huge booth set up and I will be doing interviews. They're literally setting up like a TV set. It'll be like what Zach Galifianakis does that Between Two Ferns kind of situation.
That's hilarious.
It's going to be like that. So we're going to have a good time. But the challenge is, and I said to them initially when they put this by us, I was like, look, guys, I go, just with the dates on that, just to factor in travel and make it work. I go, not counting the expenses that it's going to cost me there, I'm forfeiting like X amount of dollars in income that week in order to just be there. So I'm already in the red going in there. And it's with a podcast, like, yes, we have merch, but we're not looking to be an apparel company. We don't have a warehouse full of stuff to sell, like with our brand. Like, I know it's not popular, but our stuff is drop shipped from another company. Like the only thing that we do is our stickers, and really you have to kind of bump into one of us to get them. Like some folks have asked us to send them one, and the Dark Horse guys were gracious enough to include our stickers in one of their boxes, which is fantastic. But that's like the only thing that we really have on hand. And primarily it's just, like I said, that's a whole other job, the merchandising and everything and the shipping, taking orders, all that stuff. So we just kind of take the option that makes the most sense for us, which is the drop ship. So we work, we set up our store and our merch gets sold that way. We don't have the ability to recoup that like another vendor from a booth at an expo. So doing an expo where I have to take time off makes it really tricky. And I came up with a plan. And my plan was this. I said, look, if you guys can help me, because you're closer to that area, if you can help me find a venue that's outside of the expo, because this won't work for the expo, because on the expo floor, you've got a bunch of vendors that are trying to inform and do sales and things like that. And I'm not into interrupting them. Let's do an after expo party where I'll do a live podcast recording right there. Now, we've done this in the past now 2 or 3 times, and each time has been really, really unbelievable. Very, very cool. The first one was the 100th episode, which was great. It was really awesome. We've done this a couple of times for the Three Bells Outfitters events, with specifically their trifecta tournament that had previously gone on. And then, I said, if we can find something, I'll handle making the deal. But, this way I can sell tickets to an event and we'll do the event, but I can at least recoup some of what I'm losing, on taking the time off to be able to go and do this. They said, absolutely. We put the pieces together and I think it's going to work out great. We're trying to partner with some really cool brands to do some giveaways and some prizes. So all the ticket holders are going to be able to win some really, really cool stuff from brands that aren't necessarily just fishing based. Like there's bait companies involved, but there's also companies that make like really amazing bags that I love. We've got a company that is a spice company that's got some products that they put together that are really popular. And then, some of the regular hitters. So we've got great stuff that's going to be available. And this allows me to kind of lessen that impact of taking off, 2 or 3 days in order to go and make this happen, which is a good thing. So I'm hoping I can maybe do a similar thing, in the summer when I want to go and fish at the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, and do something like that. Go and fish out there, but maybe do a live show. And fingers crossed that we've got the reach in that area to be able to draw enough people in to where I could recoup some costs that way by at least doing a live appearance.
Yeah, it's a good way, with all the avenues of social media, being able to have, again, the brand behind or in front of the podcast, allows you to explore different venues, right? And it's an entertainment concept where it's not just a podcast, but you can actually do other things that kind of complementary. So you're not just tied to a chair and a microphone.
Yep.
Because you're able to move around and bring some sort of like entertainment value in different venues. And I think that's the beauty of it and what gives that other element that I don't think everyone in the podcast world or the entertainment world has. And again, I go back to it's that beautiful merger of your DNA and your love of fishing, just having that perfect marriage where one of them feeds the other and complements the other and heightens the other, not just for you, but for our enjoyment and entertainment. Because at the end of the day, we're the ones that follow you, the ones that listen to you, the ones that are entertained by you, are the ones who reap the benefit of this beautiful marriage you have, like I mentioned, of both sides of your world. We wouldn't be a bass fishing show if we hadn't talked a little bit more about bass fishing. So I wanted to kind of like pivot and talk about a couple of things in bass fishing. You're a big fan of it. It's a big part of your show. It's a big part of what you're doing. What is your personal best, smallmouth and largemouth?
So my personal best smallmouth, geez, I forget the exact number. I'd have to look it up, but it's not huge. It was like 2.6 pounds. Caught it on a Z-Man original green pumpkin chatterbait, yo-yoing it off the bottom. And this was right before I started the podcast. So that was my PB smallmouth. I've never beaten that. I've gotten close, but I've never beaten it. My personal largemouth. Now this is a story.
Go ahead.
So my personal largemouth came in May of 2021. And it was, no, I take that back. It was April 2021. It was the day of my wedding anniversary that year. So I had gone out real nice and early that morning with a close friend of the show, Chris Dabari. Chris is a great dude. Chris has an interesting backstory as well. Chris, I like to go, and Chris would laugh at me if I said this, but Chris is kind of a rock star. He was in a really niche, but very, very popular, like punk metal band called Today Is the Day. And Chris has had a lot of experiences touring. Specifically, I want to say it was either Japan or in Europe where they were touring with Motorhead. And
Motorhead.
Yeah, they were touring with Motorhead. And he was sharing a bunch of stories with Lemmy. Now, mind you, it's April, cold water, Things are just starting to heat up. Around here, we tell folks all the time, start on that northwest bank. Start on that northwest bank where that sunlight is hitting first. That's where your warmest water is going to be. And I got lucky because on that northwest bank, there happened to be some big rocks. So I felt really confident about this. And I was throwing like a 110 size jerk bait. Right? I'm just working this jerk bait back, and the visibility up here, we have a lot of what I would say is clearer water, a lot of stained water, but like some decent visibility. You know, it's not weird to have, 1 to 2 feet of visibility, up here. It's pretty common. When I fished in Chickamauga, like it was like casting into Yoo-hoo. And we rarely see that up here. It was like, holy cow, what's going on? And we would catch them down there, but you just had to smack them in the face with whatever you were throwing, and they would bite it. So that's how it went down there. Up here, I'm working this jerkbait, and it just comes up to the bank, and right behind it, I see the face of this largemouth come into visibility, and I didn't think it was that big. This fish, one more twitch of that jerkbait, grabs the jerkbait and starts to head back out. I lean in and set the hook. Chris, seeing this, the rod just double over, jumps down this little, like, short little ravine and grabs this fish and hands it to me. 6.66 pounds, 22 inches long.
Wow.
An absolute beast. I took all the measurements so that I could get a replica done. I still haven't done a replica. Got a bunch of pictures, and the state of Massachusetts has a amazing program where they award records and pins for catch and release, which is awesome. So all you've basically got to do is submit pictures with the measurements and submit this, and I got a pin. I got my first ever state pin from that fish. It was out of this world. Hit first thing in the morning, and there was nowhere else to go from there. I was just like, what do we do? So yeah, 6.66, which some people, that's a number that resonates with some folks.
I mean, up there, that's a big one.
That's a big fish up here. Yeah. I mean, I have friends of mine and friends of the show that have made that look like a small fish, even locally. Like, we do have big fish. The state record up here is 15 pounds.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But again, there was different, situation back then, because on the eastern part of the state, you have a lot of bodies of water where the feed cycle is different. Plus, a lot of those lakes don't freeze over nearly for as long as they do up here. So they freeze over and then they let up, and then some winters they don't freeze at all. So, you have some different forage in those lakes too. Like, you got blueback herring in there, and out west here, we don't have that. So there are bigger fish that are out there, but I have a theory that there is at least a couple big fish in every single body of water, but you've got to find them.
Yeah.
That's
they got that big because they lived long enough and they get smart,
Yeah.
What is your favorite bait? You have to pick. Let me rephrase that question.
Yep.
You have one bait you can use for the rest of your life. Which bait is it?
I'm going to leave it really, really broad. I'm going to say it's a jig. Really broad. And the reason is that you can do so much with a jig.
Yep.
It's so unbelievably versatile. So if I can only throw a jig, at least I can change out the trailer and make it more of a swimming action, something to, emulate bait fish. I can then change out and use it as a crawl sort of, imitation. I can flip it into the heaviest to cover. I can again, like I can just swim it, I can swim it right through weeds. There's a lot that I can do. Right now I'm torn between two. One of them is a finesse jig. What is it? A 3/16 ounce? 3/16 ounce finesse jig with this one trailer that I've been loving, but I've also been loving it with a 2.8 inch Kayak as well. It's a Riot Tantrum. It almost looks like a TRD style bait with little claws that come out about mid body. So it's a really compact looking presentation. I wish I had one of these swim jigs on me. I'd show you. I love them. The one specifically is from a company called Giltech. And I got one in the creek box from Dark Horse Tackle, and I have been just lighting them up on this jig. But again, with a swim bait on the back, great little moving presentation, really, really finessey. I probably would lead toward that finesse jig actually as that one, because I feel really confident that I can get bit on it more than I can a bulkier presentation. But yeah, a jig in general, that's going to be my go-to.
And then thinking about it, that kind of is like a dumb question in my part because it's jigs and bigs. I would have thought, yeah, that
Everybody
was
makes
pretty
that
obvious.
assumption.
We
Everybody
wouldn't
makes
think, oh, crankbait. Wait a minute.
Yeah,
What if it's not crankbaits and bigs?
It's funny though. My list of confidence baits, it has changed so much over the last handful of years. I would have told you up and down that there was a square bill or a rattle trap would have been in my top tier. But over like the last couple of years, I've realized that something as simple as a jig head with a paddle tail swim bait is lethal. Much more than anything that makes any noise.
Yeah, it's interesting how not just the evolution of baits, but the evolution of one as an angler.
Yep.
Like 2 years ago, you'd have told me after 90% of the time I'm throwing a jackhammer. Now I kind of rarely throw it. I still love it. I feel it's a great bait, probably one of the best baits out there. But it's one of those things where I don't know if it's more like I'm not getting the results that I wanted to and I want to change, or is it me just want to evolve and not just be a one-hit wonder kind of thing.
Yep.
Now one bait wonder, if that's more of a applicable term. What is in your bucket list of fisheries that you want to hit?
Oh man, Falcon Lake.
Oh,
The history just draws me to that. That's one for sure. Clear Lake in California. I want to go to California, and there are folks that are in California that I've had the opportunity to just meet through the show that I just want to fish with. And that's the other thing to me too. That's really important is the fishing is great, but the fishing community is even greater. I love getting on the water and just spending a day just talking with folks and doing all this other stuff. So like Falcon Lake, definitely for the history. I would really
Falcon
really,
Lake in Texas, right? I don't know if there's another Falcon Lake. Yeah,
that's the one.
What I figured. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that was was it the 90s? Like that was the spot for a lot of the Bassmasters. Yeah. That one is, there's just a lot of history there. A lot of people talk about, Lake Fork, Gunnersville. I've had the luxury of being able to fish Chickamauga. I want to go back. I would love to fish for giant smallies in either the Great Lakes or Lake St. Clair. And I kind of want to fish it all, that's the hardest question for me to answer.
Well, and it should be that way, right? You want to evolve, you want to grow. That's the whole thing of doing this sport, right? Picking the hardest sport to do and just kind of like evolve from there and make it a challenge every single time.
Yeah, for sure.
If you couldn't fish for bass,
yep,
bass no longer existed, what would be your targeted species?
Bowfin.
Yep. Never that is interesting. Never heard anybody say bowfin before. Of all my years not all my years. We've been doing the podcast for 2 or 3 years now, but yeah, and bowfin, it's interesting. We have it in Texas. I've never caught one. I don't know. I probably wouldn't even know what it looks like. Why bowfin though?
I've only ever caught one, and I got to tell you, so the bowfin I caught was not huge. It was about 18 inches long, not giant by any stretch of the word, but it hit on a Texas rigged 5-inch Senko, and they're challenging, I think, to catch. They're kind of elusive. I know some folks around here that catch them all the time. But the fight is out of this world. I think pound for pound, they're the best fighters that are out there. When this fish hit this Senko, I saw the line moving, and this was all on finesse gear too. I reeled down and I leaned in to set the hook. And once that fish realized it was hooked, it was like I had a pit bull that regularly does CrossFit on the line. Like that's what the only thing I can compare it to. I still have in my truck that EWG hook, which is mangled. It's entirely twisted because once that fish got into the net, it was just like death roll city. It was bananas. They're just so unbelievably cool. They have interesting color patterns. I would lump Snakehead into that as
Yeah,
well.
that's what I
For
was
sure.
thinking. Very similar.
Yep, I would definitely lump Snakehead in there. We don't have them up here yet. I've heard I think last year, there was some ponds that are, I think, further out east where folks have caught them, but it's only a matter of time. We're going to end up with them up here at some point. Yeah, I would say bowfin are one that I would 100% target. They're so unbelievably cool. I also have a soft spot for pickerel. I love chain pickerel.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I haven't caught them in some of my regular bodies of water in a long time, but yeah, I'm into that.
That's awesome. Well, Bobby, I've had you for almost 2 hours, or actually a little bit more than 2 hours, and I really
I love
appreciate
it.
your time, man. Been. I'm not saying this because you're on the podcast right now, because this has really truly been one of my favorite recordings.
Oh, that's
Everything
awesome.
what I would expect that when I listened to your podcast, I was like, yeah, I can't wait to have Bobby on mine podcast and talk about bass
Yeah.
fishing and your podcast and your media. I wanted to give you a couple of minutes to plug in. I know you kind of plugged in some of your partners, but again, take your time to plug in some the people that work you, that make your life in the podcast and whatever else in the fishing makes your life easier. And also, where can people follow you? Where can people listen to you? Um, for and what else should we expect from Jigs and Bigs, either in the immediate or distant future?
Cool. Awesome. So the Jigs and Bigs can be heard on pretty much every major podcast platform that's out there. The biggest ones that folks listen to are Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but all of that smaller ones like Pocket Cast, all that stuff, we're available everywhere, even on Amazon, on Audible, on iHeart, you name it. If you listen to whatever your perspective platform is, you can find Jigs and Bigs there. And if you're not what I consider a podcast person, like you just don't get it, go to jigsandbigs.com/podcast. You can listen to the show, stream it right there. Super easy. As far as partners go, we currently have 3 partners that we're working with. And I want to give a couple of shout outs for just companies that are going to soon become partners or that have just been there from the beginning. So the first one we want to thank is Three Bells Outfitters. Three Bells hooks us up with our kayaks that we regularly use. They also handle the service, and they've been really, really fantastic to us. Second up is Torres sunglasses. I think for the money, Torres offers a product that you cannot beat, and a warranty to back it up. And you can buy multiple pairs for the price of one of those other major fishing sunglasses companies. And this way you've got different lens colors and backups and things like that at an affordable price. Great product. Love Torres. Third one is Dark Horse Tackle. If you're an angler and you've had it with the conventional subscription box experience that you've been getting, then you need to take a hard look at Dark Horse Tackle, because what they're offering you is some fantastic stuff. I just got my new one in the mail yesterday. Dude, I got a Picasso freaking shock blade in there. Like, we were just talking about those on the show. Crazy, unbelievable baits that are not easy to just discover conventionally. This is going to introduce you to some new stuff and challenge you a little bit too. And you might find a new favorite bait, like I found that finesse jig. So it's a great, great package. They do the BYOB program over there, which, by the way, I think that there's a sale going on now for the BYOBs. So if that's a good thing. And if you're listening to the show, you're already a member and you want to, invite or do something to maybe bring a friend in, now they're offering gift cards. So if you want to get a gift card and somebody does a BYOB or they want to apply to a subscription or something, they've got that available. Go for it. It's awesome. It's so this way, this holiday season, you can give the gift of Dark Horse without necessarily having a subscription that somebody's like got to dive into. They could do a BYOB and sample it. Want to give a shout out to Naqua. Naqua is a battery company that produces, I think, some of the most lightweight, smallest footprint batteries that are out there. They power my electronics. They power Sean's electronics. And they also power all kinds of other accessories with their power bank. So that's awesome. Hookset Hoodlums. Love Hookset Hoodlums. Hookset Hoodlums has been there for us since day one. They are the Jigs and Bigs ride or die. Just our homies. We love them. Amazing apparel, really, really fresh, interesting designs, and a true they're not your standard typical apparel company at all. So check out hooks@hoodlums.com. You can even buy their stuff on Amazon as well. Who else did I want to mention? A-Bay Lure. A-Bay Lure Lab is sort of one of the newer sort of homies that we've brought into the Jigs and Bigs world. A-Bay Lure Lab has some of the most amazing custom painted baits that are available, but also A-Bay is a code word for Alexandria Bay. They are located up on the St. Lawrence River in Alexandria Bay near Thousand Islands. Like, it is a fishing destination, and they're in the lodging game up there as well. So if you want to go and connect with a guide or something, A-Bay Lure can direct you in like some really, really great places to stay to kind of make your experience in Alexandria Bay, Thousand Islands, sort of like that much more amazing. So those are really the companies. If I forgot anybody, I'm an absolute a-hole. I apologize. These things happen. Yeah, Armando, thank you, dude, for doing this. I appreciate it. Let's get you, after you're back from vacation, let's schedule a spot for you to get on Jigs and Bigs, and we'll dive into your podcast history, all this kind of stuff. We'll have a great conversation. I actually think it'll be absolutely awesome and probably very interesting for the listeners to hear. Plus, you know, we'll give it that old Jigs and Bigs flair. We'll talk a lot of restaurants and stuff too, I'm sure.
No, we'll talk anything, but I appreciate it. You know, when I bring my guests in, I don't add in anything other than bring your best to the show.
Yeah,
so I appreciate bringing him in. It would be my honor to be on the Jigs and Bigs, and hopefully we can make it memorable. But
for sure.
Yeah, I do. It would be an honor to be on your podcast. That's for sure. What can people expect from Jigs and Bigs? You know, what's coming down the pipeline? What are you planning to do in meet and greets? I know you mentioned something about doing live videos and stuff like that.
So we're doing in January, we're doing our 200th episode celebration, which is it's going to be a fundraiser for Veterans Inc. Veterans Inc. is a company or an organization that helps veterans, provides veteran services for like job placement, things like that, and even beyond. It's a big ordeal. Sean the Fisherman had previously worked at Veterans Inc. So it's near and dear to the Jigs and Bigs family. So we want to do something really good. And actually, both Sean and Joe are veterans. So anytime that, you know, obviously that means a lot to everybody. Anytime we can help out. So there's that going on. But what makes it really cool, that event is a game dinner. It's going to be so fun. And we're in the process right now trying to figure out the menu. So we've got this game dinner happening. We're going to record a live show. We've got lots of giveaways and raffles and stuff that are going to be going on. It'll be absolutely out of this world. We've got the Columbus Fishing Expo in Columbus, Ohio. I'll be there that entire weekend with the Dark Horse Tackle team, and then at Old Fields in Columbus on Saturday night at 7 p.m. This is February 10th. We are doing our live show there. Tickets will be available all over Instagram. And also, just check Instagram. You'll see all the links and everything on our link tree up there. And what else do we have going as far as other big shows? I have a potential live show that I'm trying to put together in the Midwest, a little bit further west. I'm thinking Minnesota. Something like that would be great, but that's still very in the early stages. As far as the video goes, that's going to take some time. We'll get there over time. But the biggest thing is that we're about to hit 100K as far as total downloads, which we are delighted
That's
about.
awesome.
Yeah, we're really, really excited about that. And when I say like we're close, we're like less than 700 plays away. So it's going to happen in weeks, if that. And that's pretty much for us. You know, what we've got kind of happening. Actually, there's one other thing I should mention. So
go ahead, man.
We do almost famously, we've been doing these multi-species online tournaments with Fishing Chaos, and we'd alternated months with an organization that was kind of like utilizing our platform, and we were utilizing their sort of footprint to put this together. And starting next year, we're exclusively doing our own tournaments, multi-species scavenger hunt tournaments. And there's been a change to the rules. It sort of levels the playing field a little bit. But when I say this is a scavenger hunt of sorts, the way it works is simple. We have 22 different species. These are nationwide tournaments. 22 different species. It's like Pokemon. Gotta catch them all. As many as you can catch, you earn a point per. And if we have any ties, they get broken by total length. The full rules are available on Fishing Chaos. I recommend go to Fishing Chaos, download that app, search Jigs and Bigs, and you'll find us on there, find those tournaments. We're currently in one in September right now, which, by the way, I'm doing terrible in. I've got 3 points, and I was in the money last month for the first time ever. So I'm hoping to be able to kind of get back on the horse maybe this weekend. But in October, we're starting that new format where we've just got 22 different species, no extra points for lunker, nothing like that. So it really does kind of even it out. Go catch a yellow perch, go catch a bowfin, go catch, a largemouth, a smallmouth, go catch a bunch of different trout, go catch a bunch of different catfish, carp, good stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It sounds putting the fun back in fishing.
That's what we're trying to do.
Man, it's been a pleasure, Bobby, to have you on the show. It really is an honor. And
thank you, man.
Definitely, you're welcome to come back anytime.
Oh, absolutely. Just let me know when.
Yeah, definitely. And we wish you the best with Jigs and Bigs. I know this is an ever-changing environment, and with technology and what's the next big thing, it's hard to, you blink and you miss an opportunity. But we really enjoy listening to you, watching your content, and we wish you the best moving forward, man. And we want to see this keeps growing and growing, and brings us laugh and entertainment and enjoyment just as much as we get it from fishing. So again, thank you for coming on to the show and spending the last 2 hours, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I really do.
So for those out there listening, remember you can follow us on Instagram, Bass Kayak and Beers, Facebook, YouTube. This is a pre-recorded episode. It's not going to be a live show, but when we get back, we'll get back to the live shows sometime in middle of October. So thanks again for tuning in. If you're going to be on the water, please wear your PFDs. If you're going to have a couple of beers, just make sure you drink responsibly. Stay safe, everyone. Peace out.